Content warning. This episode discusses the murder of children. Listener discretion is advised. On the afternoon of the 11th of January, 1965, 4 young children sat waiting on Wanda Beach, just south of Cronulla in Sydney, watching the dunes for 2 figures who were supposed to come back with their bags. Peter, Trixie, Wolfgang and Norbert Schmidt had spent the day building sandcastles and swimming under the watch of their older sister, Marianne, and her best friend, Christine. It was the middle of an Australian summer, the kind of ordinary, sun-drenched school holiday afternoon that thousands of Sydney families were having at exactly the same moment, on exactly the same stretch of coastline. At some point after lunch, the 2 15-year-olds told the younger children they were walking down to the southern end of the beach to collect their bags. They'd only be a few minutes. The children waited. The girls didn't come back. Eventually, worried and unsure what else to do, the 4 Schmidt siblings made their own way home without them, hoping, perhaps, that Marianne and Christine had simply gone on ahead. They hadn't. By the time evening came, and the girls still hadn't turned up for the train home, a search was already underway. The following morning, in the sandhills near the Wanda Surf Life Saving Club, that search found what everyone had been dreading. Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock, both 15 years old, lay partially buried in the sand. Both had been stabbed. One had suffered a blow to the head as well. It was, even by the standards of a country that has seen its share of headline crimes since, one of the most horrific and senseless killings Australia had ever witnessed. More than 60 years later, despite what would become, at the time, the largest criminal investigation in Australian history, nobody has ever been charged. Part 1. 2 girls, one friendship. Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were by every account left behind by the people who knew them. Inseparable, the kind of close, easy friendship that grows naturally between 2 teenagers who happen to live right next door to each other. Marianne's family had arrived in Australia from West Germany in 1958, when she was still a young child, settling eventually in the Sydney suburb of West Ryde after a period living in a migrant hostel further south. Her father, Helmut, and mother, Elizabeth, were raising a large family. Marianne had several younger brothers and a sister, and by January 1965, the household included Helmut Jr., Hans, Peter, Trixie, Wolfgang, and the youngest, Norbert, who had been born in Australia not long after the family arrived. Christine Sharrock's family situation was a little different. Her father had died when she was young, and her mother, Beryl, had remarried and moved to another part of Sydney. For reasons that were never fully explained publicly, either at the time or in the decades since, Christine chose to live instead with her grandparents, Jim and Jeanette Tague, a decision that, whatever its cause, placed her right next door to the Schmidt family when they moved in. That proximity was enough to spark a genuine, close friendship between 2 girls the same age, the kind of bond that made them practically sisters by the time they were both 15. Cronulla, and Wanda Beach specifically, had long been a favorite spot for the Schmidt family, a place for picnics and swimming that Marianne knew well. On the 1st of January, 1965, Christine and Marianne had gone there together, just the 2 of them, for what was, by all appearances, an entirely ordinary day out. Diary entries the girls had kept, read only after their deaths, would later reveal a detail that speaks to how utterly normal that day had been. The 2 of them had spent part of it kissing boys they'd met at the beach. The kind of small, private, teenage detail that any 15-year-old might record in a diary, never imagining it would one day be read by homicide detectives trying to reconstruct her final days. The following day, the younger Schmidt children went back to Cronulla without Christine. And in the background of all of this, a more serious family matter was unfolding. Elizabeth Schmidt, Marianne's mother, had been admitted to hospital for a major operation, leaving her eldest children, Helmut Jr. and Marianne, effectively in charge of running the household and looking after the younger siblings in her absence. It was in that context, a 15-year-old girl temporarily shouldering real responsibility for her family while her mother recovered in hospital, that Marianne and Christine asked, on the 9th of January, whether they could take the younger Schmidt children back to Cronulla for another day at the beach. Permission was granted. Rain intervened, and the outing was pushed back. Finally, on the 11th of January, the weather cleared, and the group set off for what should have been nothing more than an ordinary, sun-soaked day at one of their favorite beaches. Part 2. The last walk. Wanda Beach itself sits at the southern end of what's now known as Sydney's Cronulla Peninsula. At the time, a stretch of coast fringed by tall, windswept sand dunes that separated the beach from the streets and houses behind it. It was popular, well used, but on any given weekday it could still feel remote in patches, particularly around the dune systems where the beach curved away from the main patrolled swimming areas. The group arrived and spent the day the way Australian families had spent countless January afternoons on that same beach for generations, swimming, playing in the sand, keeping half an eye on the younger kids while the two teenagers enjoyed a rare, easy day together. At some point in the early afternoon, Marianne and Christine told Peter, Trixie, Wolfgang and Norbert that they were walking to the southern end of the beach to retrieve their bags, and that they'd be back shortly. They walked off into the dunes. And from that moment, nobody who has ever investigated this case has been able to say, with any real confidence, exactly what happened next. When the two girls didn't return, the younger children, the eldest among them not yet in his teens, made the decision to head home without them, likely assuming Marianne and Christine had simply gone ahead separately or would follow along shortly after. It's a decision that's easy to view, in hindsight, as the first domino in an unfolding tragedy, but it's worth remembering these were children themselves, doing the only reasonable thing available to them at the time, going home the way they'd always been told to if they got separated. By evening, when Marianne and Christine still hadn't arrived to catch the train back to West Ryde with the rest of the family, the alarm was finally raised in earnest. Part 3. Discovery. The search for the two missing teenagers began that evening and continued into the following morning, the 12th of January. It ended in the Sandhills, close to the Wanda Surf Life Saving Club, not far at all from where the two girls had last been seen walking off together. Their bodies had been partially buried in the sand. The nature of their injuries, once established, made abundantly clear that this had been no accident, no misadventure, no tragic drowning of the kind more commonly associated with a summer beach fatality. Marianne Schmidt had suffered a blow to the back of the head, along with multiple stab wounds. Christine Sharrock's throat had been slashed, and she too had sustained multiple stab wounds. Whoever had done this had used considerable, sustained violence against both girls. The discovery and the details that followed shocked the entire country. Two 15-year-old girls from ordinary, loving families, killed in broad daylight on a beach crowded with other holidaymakers, their bodies hidden in dunes that countless other families would have walked past that same afternoon, entirely unaware of what lay just beyond the ridge of sand. It's a detail that unsettled Australians in 1965 in a way that's difficult to fully convey from this distance. The idea that violence this extreme could occur in the middle of an ordinary summer's day, at a beach that so many families considered a place of complete safety. Part 4. The largest investigation in the country's history. What followed was, by the standards of the time, an extraordinary mobilization of police resources. Detectives worked the case with an intensity that reflected both the public horror the murders had generated and the sheer difficulty of the investigation itself. A crime committed in broad daylight, on a busy public beach, with no immediately obvious suspect and precious little in the way of hard physical evidence beyond the scene itself. By April of 1966, well over a year after the murders, police had interviewed approximately 7,000 people in connection with the case. Some accounts of the investigation, drawing on later retrospective reporting, placed the eventual total even higher, suggesting that by the early 1980s, more than 16,000 people had been interviewed over the life of the inquiry, with roughly 5,000 of them treated, at various points, as legitimate suspects. Whatever the precise final figures, there's no serious dispute about the scale of what investigators undertook. At the time, it was the single largest criminal investigation ever conducted in Australian history. And yet, for all of that effort, the case simply refused to break. Witnesses came forward describing a young man seen talking to two girls matching Marianne and Christine's description, both on a train heading toward Cronulla and later at the beach itself. Police worked with those witnesses to produce identikit images, hand-assembled composite sketches, built feature by feature from witness recollection, the standard tool of the era before any kind of digital facial reconstruction existed. But an identikit image, however carefully constructed, is only ever as useful as the tip that eventually matches a real name to it. For year after year, that match never came. The Wanda Beach murders settled, slowly and agonizingly for the families involved, into the specific, grinding limbo of an unsolved cold case. One that, decades later, would come to be recognized as New South Wales' oldest unsolved homicide investigation. Part 5. A name emerges for close to a decade after the murders. The case had no serious, sustained suspect strong enough to bring real hope of resolution. That changed, indirectly and in the most disturbing way imaginable, in July of 1969, more than 4 years after Marianne and Christine were killed, when a 21-year-old Royal Australian Navy seaman named Derek Ernest Percy was arrested in Victoria for the murder of 12-year-old Yvonne Tuohy. Percy had approached Yvonne and her friend, 11-year-old Shane Spiller, while the two children were playing at Ski Beach near Warneet, southeast of Melbourne. He'd forced Yvonne into his car at knife point. He would have very likely taken Shane too, but the boy managed to defend himself and get away, and it was Shane's account of the vehicle, including a distinctive Navy sticker, that led police directly to the local naval base, and from there to Percy himself. When confronted, Percy admitted to the killing and led police, with an unnerving calm that investigators would later describe as deeply chilling, straight to Yvonne's body. What police found afterward, in the course of investigating Percy, opened up a genuinely disturbing new dimension to the case. Officers recovered a diary belonging to him, filled with graphic, violent sexual fantasies involving children, writings that, according to those who later reviewed them, bore an unmistakable resemblance to the specific details of how Yvonne Tuohy had actually been killed. Percy was ultimately found not guilty of her murder by reason of insanity, and was detained indefinitely on the basis that he was considered too dangerous to ever safely release. It was during the investigation into Percy that detectives began seriously examining whether he might also be connected to a string of other unsolved child murders and disappearances from around the same period, a working list that would eventually come to include the Wanda Beach murders, the 1966 disappearance of the 3 Beaumont children from a beach in Adelaide, the murder of 6-year-old Alan Redston in Canberra, and the death of 3-year-old Simon Brooke. The connections investigators drew between Percy and the Wanda Beach case specifically were significant enough that he became, in the eyes of many detectives who worked the file over the following decades, the leading suspect. At the time of the murders, in January 1965, Percy was known to have been staying with a friend's grandparents in Ryde, in close proximity to where both Marianne and Christine lived. And crucially, the identikit images built from witness descriptions of the young man seen talking with the 2 girls on the train, and later at the beach bore a striking resemblance to Percy's own long, lean, distinctive face. Part 6. A lifetime of suspicion, Derek Percy would go on to spend the rest of his life in custody, and over the following decades, investigators built an increasingly disturbing picture of just how far his violent fixations extended. In 2007, nearly 4 decades after his original conviction, police uncovered a storage unit in South Melbourne containing 35 separate boxes of Percy's own writings, drawings, maps, and newspaper clippings, an extraordinary and deeply unsettling archive that somehow he had managed to arrange to have moved and stored outside of prison, despite having spent nearly all of that time incarcerated. Investigators who reviewed that material described it as containing detailed, disturbing fantasies of child abduction and murder, material that, disturbingly, appeared to closely echo real, unsolved cases. Detectives began the painstaking work of cross-referencing Percy's known movements over the years: family holidays, naval postings, sailing regattas he'd attended, against the locations and timing of a whole map of unsolved child deaths and disappearances across multiple Australian states. The overlaps, according to investigators who worked this angle of the case, were extensive enough to make Percy a credible suspect, not just in 1 or 2 additional cases, but potentially in as many as 8 or 9. And yet, across more than 40 years in custody, right up until his death from lung cancer in July of 2013, Derek Percy never confessed to any murder beyond the one he had originally been tried for. He was, by multiple accounts of investigators and journalists who studied his case closely, willing at times to acknowledge having been in the general vicinity of certain crimes. He confirmed, for instance, having driven through the Adelaide suburb of Glenelg on the day the Beaumont children disappeared from a beach there, while consistently denying or claiming an inability to recall any actual involvement in the killings themselves. Some who studied Percy closely believed this was a genuine gap in his memory, connected to whatever psychological break underpinned the extreme violence of the Tuohy murder. Others, including, reportedly, some of the detectives who spent years investigating him, came to believe it was something closer to a calculated strategy, an unwillingness to confess to further crimes for fear of eliminating any future possibility, however distant, of release. In the final years of the Wanda Beach investigation, that lingering, unresolved suspicion around Percy took on a genuinely modern forensic dimension. A blood smear recovered from the original 1965 crime scene had been preserved for decades, and in 2012, with Percy's health failing, police moved to have DNA taken directly from him, specifically so it could be compared against that decades-old sample. It represented, potentially, the first real chance in the case's history to either conclusively connect Percy to the Wanda Beach murders or definitively rule him out. Percy died in July of 2013, reportedly refusing, right up until the end, to answer any further questions about the string of unsolved child murders his name had been connected to for over 4 decades. The DNA comparison work, given how degraded a 47-year-old blood sample inevitably was, has never produced a clear, publicly confirmed result tying him definitively to the crime. Part 7. A case that never closed to this day. No one has ever been formally charged with the murders of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock. Derek Percy remains, in the eyes of many who have studied the case, the most credible suspect ever identified. But suspicion, however well supported by circumstantial detail and disturbing personal writings, was never enough to secure a conviction, and now, with his death, likely never will be. It's worth returning, before we close, to what this case actually cost, not in terms of headlines or investigative statistics, but in terms of 2 ordinary families whose lives were permanently reshaped by a few unaccounted-for minutes on a January afternoon in 1965. Marianne Schmidt had spent that summer effectively helping to run her family's household while her mother recovered from surgery. A 15-year-old already carrying more responsibility than most kids her age, taking her younger siblings out for one more day at a beach she loved. Christine Sharrock had built a life with her grandparents that, by every account, suited her, anchored by a friendship next door that had clearly meant everything to her. Neither girl made it home that evening. 4 younger children spent the rest of their lives with the memory of waiting on that beach for 2 sisters, one by blood, one by friendship, who simply never came back over the dune. More than 60 years on, the Wanda Beach murders remain unsolved, the oldest open homicide case in New South Wales, a case that once drove the largest criminal investigation this country had ever seen, and that still, after thousands of interviews, one credible but unconfirmed suspect, and a piece of degraded DNA evidence that may never yield a definitive answer, has never delivered the one thing Marianne and Christine's families spent the rest of their lives waiting for. If you have any information relating to this case, you're encouraged to contact the New South Wales Police Unsolved Homicide Unit or Crime Stoppers. Thank you for listening.